welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. However, this is a little bonus episode because this week sees the release of Halloween Kills, and we couldn't resist the chance to cover the latest Halloween movie. So, what you're about to hear is a spoiler-free discussion of Halloween Kills, okay? We won't spoil any plot details, we'll just talk about our thoughts, what we thought of the movie, and where it ranks for us in the franchise as a whole. Then, you're going to hear a little spoiler-free discussion that I had with the director of Halloween Kills, David Gordon Green. And that's all you'll hear on this episode. But if you want to hear an extended version of this episode in which me and my guest discuss the movie in spoilerific, nitty-gritty detail and we talk about specific plot elements, then you can listen to that discussion on Patreon. That will be available for $5 donors and upwards, the full, unedited, spoilerific discussion of Halloween Kills. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. So I sat down with friend of the pod and Halloween fanatic Josh Tonks to discuss all things Halloween Kills. Enjoy. Hello, Josh Tonks.
Hi, Mike.
Happy Halloween.
I know. It's definitely that time of year, isn't it?
It really is. The spooky season is upon us, isn't it? How do you like to celebrate, Josh? Is there anything that you like to sit down and watch every year in October?
Trick or treat, trick or treat is always a big one. I love that. Halloween, of course, the original.
Of course.
You know what? I love, and if I'm hosting a movie night, and, you know, there's the stragglers that are sort of still there, I tend to put on, I'll do a mini double feature of When a Stranger Calls and When a Stranger Calls Back, but just the opening scenes of both. Ooh, because I feel like they're the perfect, they're like the perfect short film. So I do that. I watch Halloween and Fear Itself, the Buffy episodes, always put those on.
Good.
Yeah. So that's kind of they're my standards. What about you?
I love it. Yeah, I try and mix it up. I don't know if I've got anything that I watch every single year. I usually try and watch at least one Halloween film in the series.
Right.
Not always the original. Sometimes I'm like, I'll give Halloween 4 a little watch, or Halloween H2O or something, you know, mix it up. But yeah, always like to cover one of those. But otherwise, no, I kind of go with whatever. But of course, this year, we've got an actual new Halloween film to discuss. So
yes, the long-awaited Halloween Kills. Very exciting.
I know. So funny, right, that Blumhouse didn't want to put it out on streaming last year. And so they delayed it by a year, and now it's out on streaming in America, isn't it? As well as
at the same time, yeah.
Yeah, love it. So before we get into this film, let me just ask you a bit about the franchise as a whole. And you're a fan, right, of the whole Halloween series? Am I right in saying?
I am. I think until speaking to you, I didn't think I was. I think I assumed everybody was.
Yeah. Well, it's like the quintessential text, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so, yeah, huge fan. Like, for me, and, you know, for anyone that's listening, you can, pass the £10 note to the friend who said Josh will talk about Scream within the first 5 minutes of the episode. But, Scream was my gateway, and then Halloween was the next. And, you know, I grew up in a little suburb where the streets were very similar to Haddonfield. And, you know, as a kid and a young teenager, I'd be seeing him around every corner and spooking myself, but kind of loving that and always getting excited for the autumn, because that's when those vibes would be in the air, you know?
It's so true, isn't it? And there are things about the Halloween franchise I love, but on the whole, I would say I'm not a fan of Halloween as a franchise. I think the first film is a masterpiece, and I think the legacy of what has come afterwards has been just a bit of a mess, really, from beginning to end. And I'm sure we'll talk about this as we talk about the new movie and also just the legacy of Michael Myers in general. But I think it's a format that has never warranted sequels, I suppose, and I think that's been the problem with all of the Halloween sequels. But speaking of which, I want to quickly do a little quickfire round, Josh. I want to ask you your thoughts.
Okay.
Running through each sequel, and I want to hear your thoughts, okay? So obviously you love the first one. Halloween 2 from 1981. What are your thoughts?
I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoy that one.
So fun. Love that one as well. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
Didn't like it as a kid, but you kind of need to grow up to understand that it's actually a pretty bananas but very good movie.
Yes. It's one of those films, once you get over the fact that it's not a Michael Myers film, it's actually more fun than some of the other Halloween sequels, I think.
For sure. It every year, if I do a ranking, it sort of slowly starts creeping up
100%.
towards the top. Yeah.
100%. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers.
I don't like it as much as everybody else does.
Interesting. Okay.
I love the aesthetic of it, and I love some of the set pieces. I just find it a bit dull. I find it a bit boring.
Fair enough. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers.
The original sort of run, I guess, like 80s run, it's my least favourite.
Yeah, it's the worst, isn't it? Let's be honest.
It's just rubbish.
Yeah, really bad. The controversial Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. What about that one?
I low-key love it.
Yes.
I think I prefer it to 4, and I love... I'm a 90s kid. Like, I love that sort of harsh, cold 90s aesthetic. I think it's scary. I love, actually, when you break down the plot and you take away all of, like, the superfluous, we've got to, like, wrap up what they kind of were trying to do in Halloween 5. I think it's actually, like, really pure and really scary, and it does some really cool things. So I like that one.
I do as well. I'm waiting for that film to finally be reappraised. It hasn't happened yet, but I feel like one day people are going to go, yeah, that one was all right. That one was right. But, it hasn't happened yet. There's a lot of hate still for that film. Halloween H2O.
I mean, it's a fave. It's got to be. It's well, not Kevin Williamson, but it's Kevin Williamson.
Yeah.
I don't love now. I think in hindsight, I think it's aged quite poorly, but I think the nostalgia keeps it alive for me. I love Josh Hartnett. I love Michelle Williams, and obviously it's Jamie Lee Curtis's return, and the ending is just a banger. That ending is... That's how it should have ended the series.
Right. I kind of agree with you there. I'm not as up on Halloween H2O. I think, and we'll talk about this when we talk about these new movies a bit, I think, because it has kind of the opposite pros and cons to the new movies. But I think that Halloween H2O is a great Laurie Strode story, but I think it's quite a bad horror film. I think it's quite a bad slasher film. But isn't it funny as well that when you're a kid... when you're younger, at the time Halloween H2O came out, it felt like 20 years since the first one was such a long time. Obviously, it's been now like 23 years since Halloween H2O. It's just insane, isn't it?
Don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, it's horrible. So then, what have we got next? Oh, Halloween Resurrection. Oh dear, Halloween Resurrection?
I don't know her.
Yeah, no, not familiar. Yeah, not even Tyra Banks can save that for you.
Not even Tyra Banks, and it's yeah. I mean, it's a cool concept, I guess, that could be a great film that isn't a Halloween film. But if you're watching it in the moment, in the time, 2002, and you see that opening scene, it just spoils so much of everything that came before it, and it makes the rest of the film feel really hard to watch. And then you add the fact that it's the 2000s and that every character in every 2000s horror movie is like a nightmare.
Yes.
Like, you just hate them all. So,
just awful. Yeah.
It's tough. It's a cool concept. It's not for me.
I get it. Speaking of 2000s horror, then we have Rob Zombie's Halloween. What are your thoughts on Rob Zombie?
For me, I don't like it, but I can see why a lot of people do. I think it's unfortunate that he felt or like was had to do like the remake element of it, and why not just do something completely different? But that's not the way that these things work. I'm not a huge fan of his work. It's not my vibe, but I think he does what he's doing in that film very well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like I think you're totally right. I think where he is more interesting is when he's doing something a bit bold and different, but when he does literally recreate Haddonfield with Malcolm McDowell and with all these other people pretending to be the characters from the original, it just that was where it really fell down, wasn't it? I think.
Love Danielle Harris though. Love Danielle Harris.
She's great. Halloween 2 by Rob Zombie. What about that one?
I think it's slightly better than Halloween 2007 because he's got sort of free reign to do what he wants with that one. There's some genuine moments of heartbreak in that, I think, and I think it's probably the one with the scariest Michael across the board.
Interesting. It's also probably the nasty. Well, we'll talk about this latest one actually. But Halloween 2 is one of the nastiest of the Halloweens as well.
For sure. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Then we had a big old gap of basically close to a decade, didn't we, with no Halloween? But then we get Blumhouse Halloween 2018. What did you think of this one?
I was infuriated by it at the time. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say I've grown to love it, but I think the anticipation that probably caused the rage has subsided, and it's absolutely watchable for sure, and entertaining. But for me, it doesn't do anything different than all the sequels did. If anything, I think it kind of leans on the sequels a little more than it likes. And me personally, I'm not a massive fan of the way it takes Laurie Strode's character. I think it's almost laughable. What sort of happens to her personally. I think other people do really relate to it, but I think it's a bit silly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I enjoy this film, actually. This is one of the Halloween films I've enjoyed more in the series, I think. I reviewed this movie when it came out in 2018 here on the podcast with Chris Hewitt, and I was much more positive about it than he was, and that most people were. And I think it comes back down to that idea that I'm not a huge fan of the franchise. I don't have a lot of horses in this race. I don't have a lot of emotional investment in the whole Michael Myers, Laurie Strode saga. And I think as a fun Saturday night at the movies, a gory slasher film, I thought this was fine. I thought it was fun. I liked some of the teen characters. I liked some of the kills. I thought it had some good suspense. Where it really falls down for me is any time it has to connect with the original film. So I guess it's a good slasher film, but a bad Halloween film, I think that what they did to Laurie Strode in this one was pretty bad. And I feel like, again, I don't really care about this because I don't really care about the Halloween franchise, but I think the problem with this for fans, right, is that it feels like David Gordon Green and Danny McBride didn't really care about Laurie Strode. She is a bit two-dimensional in this one, and as much as I think this film is a good, fun, silly slasher film, I don't think it's a very good Laurie Strode, Michael Myers film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it had the opportunity to wipe away, 40 years of sequels and to do anything, whether that be something really simple or whether it, do something completely different, whatever. And it sort of seemed to paint itself into corners that it didn't need to with certain plot elements and try and fabricate sort of a relationship between Michael and Laurie, which really isn't there when you take away the sort of sister element. So
exactly.
And I think by having him, locked up at the beginning of the film, it's fine if you're doing what they were kind of doing, which is like the Force Awakens thing, which is like they almost sort of remake the first one, but it is a sequel. But it's sort of, for me, sort of negated a lot of Laurie's story because he's not the boogeyman. He's just some guy that's locked up. Like, I would hate to imprint my opinion on someone else's trauma because that's what it's all about. So we hear from Jamie Lee Curtis all the time.
Indeed. Yeah.
God bless her. But move on, Laurie. Move on.
Yeah, I think, and
it's 40 years.
Exactly. We should explain, shouldn't we, as well, for anyone who might have forgotten or who hasn't seen that original Halloween 2018. What they did was, what David Gordon Green decided to do was wipe the slate clean, right? Yeah. So they essentially removed from the canon all of the sequels from Halloween 2 in 1981 onwards. So Halloween 2018 was a direct sequel taking place 40 years later to the original Halloween in 1978, which was an interesting idea. But what that means is, by wiping the slate clean, what we're saying is there is no longer any kind of connection between Michael and Laurie, right? They're no longer brother and sister. All of that kind of mythology was established in the sequels. So now, when we look at this story, we've got this guy who breaks out of a mental institution in 1978, kills 3 babysitters on Halloween night?
Yeah, I think it's 5 in total in the movie, but like 3
on that street in Haddonfield or whatever. Yeah. Then tries to kill Laurie Strode. She's saved by Dr. Loomis. He is then caught, we find out in Halloween 2018. He's caught and re-imprisoned, right? For another 40 years. So actually, Laurie Strode, in terms of her involvement, she spent what?
She spent about 15 minutes of her life with.
Yes, exactly. She spent about 15 minutes being chased by Michael Myers and then survives. Now, of course, it was a traumatic experience. She lost 3 of her friends. She was nearly killed herself. Obviously, that's a traumatic experience. But I think by taking away all of that other history between her and Michael and then jumping forward 40 years and seeing her, I don't know, reduced into a bit of a kind of two-dimensional, almost caricature of a woman with PTSD, right? Akin to Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2 or something. It was a much less nuanced portrayal of a woman with that trauma than we get in H2O even, right? And it didn't quite make sense in the timeline.
Yeah, and it's hard to talk about it because obviously I haven't experienced what that character experienced, so who am I to judge? And they even bring it up in the film.
Yes.
They kind of, a character sort of goes, but he only killed a few people, like, what's the big deal? And they kind of look at that character as if he's being incredibly insensitive. So they do comment on it, but I think that it doesn't spend enough time with Laurie after Michael sort of starts the spree of killing to maybe explore why and how. And I think it's... Yeah, I think it's flawed in that way.
It is, and I think they had to. And then, like I say, I did really enjoy some of the elements without Laurie in a way of that last movie. I quite liked the teen characters. I liked the babysitter and the little boy, and I thought some of those scares that happened in that kind of middle chunk were quite fun. Him wandering around Haddonfield, killing people, him hiding in the closet of that little boy. I think some of that was really effective. But again, the kind of mechanics of how they get Laurie and Michael together, right, is one of the worst parts, because obviously, again, like we said, there is no connection to them. She doesn't live in that kind of busy Haddonfield anymore. She lives off in the middle of nowhere, right, in this kind of fortress-like house. So there's this whole awful B plot where there's this doctor. What's that doctor's name?
Dr. Sartain,
who kind of wants to become Michael or understand Michael or something, and basically like kidnaps Michael and Laurie's granddaughter and drives them to Laurie's house, but then he's killed pretty swiftly after that, and it's just a way to maneuver them all to Laurie's house, isn't it, for the final act? And that was where it wasn't great.
Yeah, it's silly. It's silly in a film that, although there's a lot of humor, which, some people liked and some people didn't. It feels that the tone is quite serious, and then you have this ridiculous plot that takes it out of reality almost. And it's like, well, if you want to make a bonkers silly movie, then that's fine, but that's not sort of what you were pitching all this time.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Yeah.
So how did you feel about the idea that David Gordon Green and Blumhouse were going to do 2 more, Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends? What were your kind of thoughts and anticipations?
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Like, say what I will about, Halloween, Hallow 18, whatever.
Nice.
I just, whenever there's going to be a Halloween movie come out, I'm going to be excited regardless. I can't not be.
Yes.
So, and if anything, I was more excited at the prospect of Halloween Kills because my expectations were lower, because I didn't love 2018 as much. I was like, well, I can go in and just enjoy this and not feel like this has got to be the sequel that like matches the original. Like, hello, naive. Like, just enjoy it, and
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think that's maybe why I didn't have as strong feelings as you about the previous one, because I've never been as big a fan of the franchise as a whole. And I guess the way I feel, and I still feel quite giddy with excitement though every time there is a new Halloween film, but also I feel that when I go and watch a new Star Wars film, and I wouldn't call myself the biggest Star Wars fan in the world, but there's something quite exciting about returning to something, and hearing that theme music come up and seeing those titles come up, right? And it's the exact same thing with Halloween. It's like the second that theme kicks in and we get that classic title sequence with the pumpkin and everything, I was like, here we fucking go, couldn't wait.
It's on.
Yeah, it's on.
Same, and there's a sense of community as well, because that you're around a large group of people that are kind of equally as excited, and there's going to be a discourse and conversation, and I think that's why we come back, because it's not just I'm watching a movie, it's I'm watching a movie and then there's all this other stuff you get to do.
Yes, exactly. So With all that in mind, let's talk about Halloween Kills then, which we just saw this week. Josh, give us a little, and we'll start off with a spoiler-free little chat about our thoughts. But first of all, give us your little spoiler-free plot synopsis of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be spoiler-free when you have that many trailers with that much information in them.
Right. Yeah.
But the story picks up sort of in the same vein as Halloween 2 in 1981, which is more of the same night. But this time, rather than just focusing on Laurie and her daughter Karen and her granddaughter Allison, we sort of involve the whole town. So we meet some of the survivors of 1978, and we see sort of the escalation of their fear and panic and mass hysteria as they realize that Michael once again is on the loose.
Excellent. Very good plot synopsis. And you're so right. That's the essence of this film, isn't it? It's really kind of making efforts in a way to be like, this isn't really about Laurie Strode and Michael. This is about Haddonfield and Michael, isn't it? I think, I
think so, yeah. And it feels like it's, it's in the title, Halloween Kills. Like, this is the escalation. This is the 2.0 version of what we had. Yes. And it's really just expanding the world. Indeed. Expanding the fear and the terror that, maybe felt a little bit more intimate in the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what did you think of Halloween Kills?
Well, funnily, it's a ludicrous movie.
Yes.
I think that was the word that I constantly kept repeating in my brain. Like, this is ludicrous. This is so over the top, so big. When I enjoyed it, and there were quite a few moments that I really, really did enjoy, I probably enjoyed it more than the one before.
Yeah.
And then the moments that I didn't enjoy, it wasn't that I liked them less, but they were ridiculous. And I think because of my low expectations, I was fine with that.
Yes, exactly. Same here. Like, I think, like I said, I've never had particularly high expectations about any Halloween sequels. So I was happy to go along for the ride with this one. Now, I think the film is any good? I don't know if it is any good. In fact, I think it might be quite bad. It's a bit of a mess all round, but there were moments of it that I thought worked quite well, and moments that I thought were absolutely terrible. I laughed a lot. We both laughed a hell of a lot in the screening of this. It's got a lot of violence. It's quite schlocky, this film. And I think, even though objectively, I think the film is not good, and probably not as good as the previous one, I think that this might be a movie I enjoyed more in a kind of silly way. And I think I could see myself going back to this one and revisiting it more than Halloween 2018.
I think
Do you know what I mean?
I think so. And I think it is just I think David Gordon Green nails the horror more in this one.
Yes.
I think there are more sequences and set pieces. It's more exciting, I think.
Yeah.
That depends what you like. But for me, I found the first one a little bit repetitive in the sense that there were lots of, let's just find a body that looks really gross constantly. And this one, we actually get some kills in Halloween Kills, which is...
We do.
Probably the most in the entire franchise.
Yes, it's got the highest body count, I would say, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And you're right, like, what's great is it's not just the kills. There are some actual kind of horror set pieces that involve a bit of suspense and a bit of build-up before we get to the kills, right? And that is something that, it feels like it's been a while since a Halloween movie had that, in a way.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say Jamie Lee Curtis is in this one less, right? I mean, it's less a movie about Laurie Strode, even less than the last one was, I would say, right?
Yeah, it's a middle chapter.
Yeah.
It's a classic middle chapter, and what I'm imagining, I don't know for sure, but what I'm imagining is that the third one is going to, be the final confrontation between the two of them, and that, it all boil down to that. But if we're expanding the world, and, it's like, this is the Two Towers. It has neither a beginning nor an end.
Yes.
And it may have some themes and ideas that they're presenting, but if we're talking story, there isn't any.
No.
Not that Halloween itself has much of a story,
right?
Which is where I think a lot of the sequels fall down. But by bringing too much story into it, but like this one, it's a middle chapter, and I think if you come in understanding that it's a middle chapter, you're going to know that, don't expect a conclusion and things that are going to be all wrapped up in a neat little bow.
Absolutely. And that's really interesting. Let me just ask you a bit about that, because you said some really interesting stuff about that when we chatted the other day, but about how Halloween is almost a film where it's impossible to make a sequel, right? What do you mean by that?
So, yeah, for me, I think if you look back at the original, as far as I'm aware, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill just wanted to make a scary movie.
Yeah.
As simple as that. And he used his skill as a director, his very, keen eye for style, and then her skill at sort of like, writing those female characters like she did, to create something really simple and effective. And it's sort of case in point with Michael himself. He's a blank slate.
Yes.
Which provides ample opportunity in the sequels to project onto that blank slate whatever you want. But by doing that, by adding more, by being creative in that way, and in some cases not, but you're effectively doing the opposite of what made the original work, which is that you have this blank template, this blank, pale, emotionless face. That's what you've got, and that's what the story is. It's really, really simple.
Yes.
It's almost like a day in the life of Haddonfield that ends in some babysitters getting killed. And there isn't anything to it. The things that we find are all in atmosphere and suspense and John Carpenter's direction. And then these characters that we warm to, but we don't really learn that much about them. But, we've grasped onto for years, Laurie Strode, had a thing for Ben Tramer. Ooh, and like, what could that be? That's exciting because we never find out. We get these hints and we can talk and discuss, but ultimately it's a simple, simple film. And that's why you get so many hit or miss sequels, I think, because they don't need to exist.
I think you're absolutely right with that. I think it's so true, because it's always something that I thought about that franchise. If you take like the big three slasher franchises, right, I've always found that the sequels, the legacy of Halloween has been the worst in comparison to Elm Street or even Friday the 13th. And I think that's exactly why, because the first one was that so beautifully simple that it doesn't work. It either means that you end up with very, very repetitive sequels where they're just replicating that very simple structure, or more likely what they do is they make them more convoluted and they build more mythology, right? Even Halloween 2 1981, like you said, they've already got to introduce the idea that Laurie and Michael are brother and sister and everything. And you get to Halloween 4, 5 and 6 and it gets absolutely mental, doesn't it? And it's it's so true. And even though David Gordon Green and Danny McBride were very kind of insistent about how we're stripping it all back, aren't we? We're making him the Shape again. We're taking away all of that other mythology. You found that by now having a trilogy, which maybe they didn't originally plan, they kind of are having to rebuild that mythology again, aren't they? They're doing exactly the thing they wanted to avoid.
For sure. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure some of your listeners may, but as far as I'm aware, they wanted to do 2 originally. Right. They wanted to do back-to-back. And we'll get into spoilers in a bit, but there's an element in this film that I think they intended for the first, but maybe didn't have the budget for.
That's interesting.
And so I think there's elements that maybe were sort of not more complicated, but I don't know. There's exciting elements in Halloween Kills that I like that I maybe would have loved to have seen in Halloween 2018.
Okay, well, let's get into spoilers and we can talk about more specifics, but I just want to finish with your final placement, Josh, of where Halloween Kills roughly kind of ranks for you in amongst the whole Halloween franchise, do you think?
Oh, that's tricky.
It is, isn't it?
Put me on the spot.
I know.
Okay.
I know. In a very, very hit and miss franchise, where does Halloween Kills go?
I'd put it... You know what? I'd put it somewhere... like high middle.
Yeah, I think I would too. Like sort of second tier, I suppose. Somewhere beneath Halloween 3, Halloween H2O.
Yeah,
just
around there, just under there.
Yeah.
Because that's where my sort of, for me, I know I'm a bit weird loving Halloween 6, but like I think most people would put like Halloween 4 in that area maybe as well. Like you've got your your 4, and for me 6, and then probably the 2018 version all in there. For me, if we're being just comparing it to the one before, I think it's slightly better, but only just. And I'm not even convinced I believe that yet, because it's so soon. You know what I mean?
Yes.
My thoughts could change tomorrow.
It's so true. I feel the same way. You know, it's hard to form an opinion. We've only just watched the film, haven't we? But yeah, all I can say is that I did, despite all of its many, many flaws, I did actually have quite a lot of fun with it. So that in itself is worth something, right? Even though the film is a bit of a mess, let's be honest. But you would recommend it, right? I mean, obviously, if you're horror fans listening to this, you're going to go see it either way, right?
Yeah.
But would you recommend this film to people?
Definitely.
Yeah.
100%. You can't not. You want to be part of the narrative and the chit-chat and all of that.
Yeah.
You have to. And I think it's a great setup for a third one, because I honestly have no idea what they're going to do.
Oh my God, I know. I cannot wait. So we're going to get to spoilers shortly, where we can talk about some plot specifics, Josh. But first of all, here is my discussion with the director of Halloween Kills, David Gordon Green. I asked him what it was like to follow up Halloween 2018 with a sequel, what it's like to make a middle chapter of a trilogy and all of the problems that can throw up. And I also pitch him my idea for Halloween Ends. Enjoy. I am delighted to be joined by the director and writer of Halloween Kills, David Gordon Green. Hello, David.
Hey, Mike.
David, tell me, it must be really difficult to come up with a Halloween sequel that gives everyone what they want, but also does something different, right? When you've got such a simple premise as Halloween, how did you approach making a sequel to your Halloween 2018 and doing something different and fresh with that format?
Well, if our previous chapter in 2018 was an opportunity to reconnect with fans of the original and invite new fans that were maybe less familiar with the original, and then our third chapter will be the conclusion of the Laurie Strode, Michael Myers saga as we see it. The middle chapter here with Halloween Kills is kicking open the closet of the toy closet and just making a big mess and smashing shit and having a good time at the movies and not cleaning up our mess before we make a quick exit and await the third and final conclusion of the saga.
Love it. Is it difficult making a movie that you know is a middle chapter? So it's not a kind of self-contained story in its own right, I suppose.
For me, it's refreshing in a way because you don't need a lot of those devices of setup and payoff. You literally are just we're just on the playground having a great time with our characters. We've brought some legacy characters back from the original film and are fleshing out some of the characters that we introduced in the 2018 film. And so we've got everyone there and just turn Haddonfield upside down for some mischief and mayhem.
And the original Halloween 2018, it felt like you were very much kind of throwing back to the 1978 version. There were kind of nods towards the original, right? Equally, this movie, even though you've erased Halloween 2 from 1981 from the timeline, it feels a little bit like you're nodding towards that Halloween 2, where we've got the night continues, Laurie goes to hospital. Tell me a little bit about that, about how much you wanted to draw from the original Halloween 2.
Well, when we decided we wanted to do something chronological in the timeline and pick up exactly where the last one left off, we had a lot of considerations that were similar to what Carpenter and his team had to think about in their Halloween 2. Mm-hmm. They created a device where Michael and Laurie were brother and sister, and we don't have that. We don't utilize that narrative, and so we had to have a different engine to drive those two characters, and we'd also written ourselves into a corner where he was trapped in a basement and she had a knife in the gut. So those two characters were going to inevitably go in two separate ways, and so our experience becomes, where do they go, and how do we see these character evolutions from two different sides of town, and how do they stir up everyone imaginable between the two?
Did you create a rod for your own back by removing the brother and sister connection? Because what you've got now is Michael and Laurie, who are two random strangers to each other almost, right? Except that obviously the fans want to see Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, but to Michael, Laurie is just some random babysitter that he tried to kill 40 years ago, right? I mean, is there much more to it than that?
I don't think there's anything more to it than that. I think she's made it personal, but I don't think he's he doesn't have a specific target. He's just a kid trying to get home.
Yeah, and it must be really difficult to come up with stuff that you can do with a character like Michael Myers, who has so little to him, right? He's such a blank slate.
It is always a challenge because he gives you so little. You know, he's not there with a Hannibal Lecter monologue.
Yeah,
and he's not able to pull out a gun and he's not running at you with a chainsaw. He's got his very specific boundaries, and to me, that's the part of the challenge of putting this together is how do you make things fresh? We like to, as a fan of slasher movies, I like to invite cliches and tropes to some degree, but then you also have to do something new. And when for an example, when we'd be discussing a particular kill scene, I remember raising my hand to the group of my co-writers and my department heads and saying, has anybody ever seen anybody get stabbed in the armpit before? And nobody could think of a reference. So then that becomes an exciting opportunity. And then, you and someone in your audience will say, oh, I've seen that before. And then I get to find a new good movie to watch.
What do you prefer when you're directing these horror set pieces? You know, is it more about the build up for you, the suspense in that kind of John Carpenter way? Or is it more about the money shot, about the blood, the gore, the kill itself?
That's debatable. And we debate that a lot on set. And even me and my editor debate that. Sometimes we always have footage that has the build up to the kill. And always. We normally have footage that is the build up that we can create tension and suspense. And we normally have gratuitous footage of the kill itself. And then sometimes we choose one path or the other. In Halloween Kills, it is not a movie that I would say is full of suspense and tension as much as it is aggression. We're saying something a little different. So a lot of that footage that we shot is not being used, although there's some, and there's sequences as, Michael's stalking Lindsay Wallace through a park that feel more traditional in that type of a sequence. But then there's a lot more of him in explosive horror, and it's the balance of surprise and suspense, right? And which one you're going to utilize for that, and we go with surprise a lot in this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's no spoiler to say, right, that this is a movie filled with carnage, maybe the most carnage we've seen in a Halloween sequel, which again that's not what the original Halloween that John Carpenter made was all about, really, was it? But I guess you're contending with not just the legacy of Halloween, but the legacy of slasher movies in general, right? Slashers have changed a lot since John Carpenter's Halloween.
It's tricky. And if you were in our production meeting before we started shooting the film, I would have said, this is not a gratuitous, this is a violent movie and an aggressive movie, but it's not gratuitous and it's not gory. That changed while we were shooting it. And I don't know how much of it is that adrenaline that you get as a filmmaker where you're like, oh man, when his eyeballs pop out of his head, that looks awesome. Let's use that in the movie. Well, I do know that is what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Yes. And you mentioned at the beginning, obviously, we've got some returning characters in this movie. That was actually quite exciting, and I think that's going to be really fun for Halloween fans, that we've got some of the characters, even played by some of the same actors, right, as the original, coming back here to reprise their roles. That must have been such a joy to kind of bring the gang back together.
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the thrill of this chapter, is to be able to take these legacy characters that John Carpenter and Deborah Hill created in 1978. Those characters have been burned in my mind since I first saw the film, and then to take the seeds of characters that we introduced and established in 2018, and then to bring those worlds together and expand the Haddonfield universe was really fun. Just literally that reunion of all of this cast as we bring them together, and then study what their lives have been like for 40 years, and really with each of these actors we'd create those stories and what has happened to Tommy in the meantime that made him, he was such a cute kid cowering in the corner when Laurie was babysitting him, and now he's pissed off and he's got a baseball bat and he's ready to kick somebody's ass.
Yeah, it feels like a very violent movie. It feels like quite an angry movie. I remember when Halloween 2018 came out, you did get a lot of criticism towards the film for it being very pro-gun, right? Whether or not that was deliberate, but that kind of, what you'd done to Laurie's character and that kind of Linda Hamiltonification, I suppose, of her with all of her arsenal of weapons saving the day at the end. It feels, I don't know whether this is deliberate, but it feels like it kind of went the opposite way in Halloween Kills, where every time a character goes to use a gun, something really bad happens to them. It literally backfires, right? I just wondered, was that a kind of deliberate choice on your part? Was that a response to the criticisms of Halloween 2018?
No, and those are always tricky conversations to have, because I assume there is a responsibility as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, and things like that. But when you're in a horror genre, and one of the reasons I like it is I feel like it's a creative, emotional, expressive place to be. That's a release, and so any of that would be subconscious, because this is not a film with a message. But at the same time, I think the dialogue is smart. I think it's intelligent to bring conversations of how violence in movies affects real life, because it inevitably does. It desensitizes people in some way, and I'm not afraid of those conversations. But my intent is to make a movie that's just purely entertaining for us to eat popcorn to, and I don't go in there with a message, although you can. And I think genre is a wonderful place to hide politics and messages if you want to. But these movies are not about that, and subconsciously sometimes you do find yourself writing things that feel relevant or important, or the fact that this movie is about vigilante justice and mob mentality and things like that. Even though we made the film 2 years ago, it does seem to have found more of an immediate cultural resonance. So it's hard to know. It's the chicken or the egg what it is, and is culture creating movies, or movies creating culture? And I think it's all of it. It's just all the beauty of that is that people can have conversations. They walk out of a movie, hopefully they've had a good time, but it's equally as important that the people that enjoy it have a conversation with the ones that don't, and that criticism is valid on both sides.
Yeah. So finally then, what can you tell me about Halloween Ends? You've written it, I presume, right? When does that go into production? Is there anything you can tell me about it?
It's written. I gave it to Carpenter 2 nights ago to get his notes on the new draft, and I feel really good about it. And until he throws me a curveball or an inspiration, I'll be excited to hear what he thinks. And we start shooting in January. I'm very excited about it. I think for me, it's the most personal of the 3 Halloween films that I've made. And I've got a very specific concept of it, but I also pride myself on being open to the opportunity and evolution as casting and realities and weather and culture start to permeate that production. We'll tell our story as it feels intuitively correct.
I love it. Well, I'm too late, unfortunately, but I wanted to pitch to you, David, my idea for Halloween Ends, which is to give us a multiverse extravaganza, right? Let's bring back different Laurie's from different timelines, all of her different kids, Danielle Harris, Josh Hartnett. Let's bring back all the various different Michael Myers, the Cult of Thorn, and have them all come together in one big extravaganza to blow out the entire franchise. You know, that's my
I like
pitch
that.
to you.
That'll be for the animated series.
Yes. David Gordon Green, thank you so much for joining me.
Good talking to you.
A big thank you there to David Gordon Green. So, Josh, we are now going to get into spoilers, right? We're going to discuss specific moments of this film, what we thought of the plot in general, and I've got so much that I want to ask you about. So, for people listening on Patreon, you can listen to that half of the discussion right now. But for everyone else who's leaving us at this point, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us where people can find you and more of your work out there online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on Instagram and Twitter, and it's just my name, @Joshua Tonks. And also, if you fancy listening to something spooky, you can listen to an audio play that I'm a part of. So Lonely Spectre Productions asked me to be part of Eerie Earfuls Volume 1, The Haunted Sounds of Halloween, which you can get on Bandcamp, which is an app where sort of, I think, like independent artists can like put their music and things like that. It's super fun. It's like a throwback to like 1950s, 1960s sort of Disney spooky kind of Scooby-Doo kind of vibes. Yeah, so give that a listen if you're in the mood.
Amazing. Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it for our bonus Halloween Kills episode. I would love to hear from you guys. What did you think of this movie? Do you agree with me and Josh? Do you have slightly different takes on this movie? I would love to hear what you thought. Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or you can find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Don't forget, if you want to hear the full discussion, including the spoiler section, then sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back on Friday for another regular episode of The Evolution of Horror.